What's happening, fam? We are back to review yet another chapter of One Piece, this time chapter 1047, which is titled The Sky Over the Capital. However, before we get into the recap and review of this chapter, we can talk about the color cover page that we got for this week. It takes a break from the drama storyline and we get kind of a slice of life image here when we see all of the Straw Hats kind of enjoying themselves and having a cookout on the beach. Now, ultimately, there's not a whole lot to unpack here. There's not a whole lot of information that's worth pondering about. The one thing that is worth mentioning here is Momonosuke's presence. Some people have said that this might be an indicator that he could be joining the crew. I tend to lean against that idea, but I guess we'll just see how everything plays out once Wano ends. But that aside, it is an amazing color cover page, definitely poster worthy and a great way to return to One Piece after a break. So now that we got the cover page out of the way, if you guys are familiar with this channel or at least my manga reviews, you know how this format works. Typically, I'll do a recap of the chapter's contents, then a rating and a discussion. However, if you do not need a recap of this chapter's contents, you can go ahead and skip to this point in the video to get right into the rating and discussion part. With that out of the way, getting into the recap, this chapter starts off with the first 3 or so pages dedicated to Momonosuke and his struggle. And this chapter starts off with Yamato getting the first line trying to motivate Momonosuke to begin moving the flame clouds or creating his own. And after a few lines of pessimism, we get a flashback of the night that the castle burned down, where we see that Lady Hiyori and Kinemon are actually in the process of trying to bolster or to talk up Momonosuke to prepare himself for what he needs to do, which is to jump 20 years into the future and personally rebuild the strength of the Kozuki clan. And for the most part, this flashback kind of just serves to bridge the gap between the past and the present and Momonosuke doubting himself, but we do get some amazing panel work as well as some emotional range when it comes to all the characters who were involved in this flashback scene. Now, this 3-page flashback is neatly wrapped up with Momonosuke saying that he will go and then following it up with the panel of the present where he's actually proactively trying to move the flame clouds or to create them. And that's about all we get from Momonosuke for now as we return to the fight with Kaido and Luffy up on the rooftop. And the first bit of dialogue that we see from this scene is Kaido confirming that Luffy can in fact grab the lightning. And we can see that on the spot, Luffy keeps up with his goofy naming conventions and names the attack he uses with the lightning, Gomu Gomu no Lightning. Ultimately, Kaido dodges the attack and then clubs Luffy in the face. And then we get this goofy spinning moment with Luffy catching onto the lightning. But we get a very important line after that where Kaido mentions that abilities alone cannot conquer the world. And then after hammering down on Luffy's face once again, we get a big reveal from Kaido where he mentions that Roger had no fruit. Also, that Haki is the only way to transcend all. Now, there is a lot to unpack there, but I'll save that for the discussion part of this video. But there's a little bit of action going on as this quote is being made. And as you can see here, Luffy is properly using his awakened devil fruit ability as he manipulates the ground to lessen the impact of him crashing into it. And although that technique was effective, it actually plays off as a double-edged sword when it comes to this moment, because as he recoils and bounces back up, he has perfectly set himself up to be attacked by Kaido's named move, Destroyer of Death, Thunder Bagua. The force of this move sends Luffy all the way up into the sky, but not before he can grab Kaido's chest and give it a rubber-like quality, transferring his awakened devil fruit powers onto Kaido yet again. But Kaido gets annoyed and starts thrashing Luffy's arm with his Kannon bow, as well as using a named move called Dragon Twister Demolition Gust to send attacks up toward Luffy. And Luffy is just taking them for the time being. But before we can see why Luffy is doing that, we actually go back to the Fire Festival where things are just starting to simmer down. And the people of Wano are sending up their lanterns and their hopes and their prayers, even checking in with the likes of Toko and Tenguyama before we get a little bit of dialogue from Boss Hyogoro and the samurai who are present on Onigashima, when they correctly rationalize that Luffy's success would almost certainly mean their death, as Onigashima would fall should Kaido be defeated. But this is a fate that they gladly resign themselves to, and one thing I do want to point out about this scene is this guy right here, who does share some similarities with Zoro's design, as well as having a wife in the Ringo region, which is where the Shimosutsuki family is from. But I digress from that for now. We do actually get a touching moment of everyone cheering on Luffy despite knowing the danger that comes with his success. And we do briefly check in with Usopp. We get about 2 panels with this guy and we see that the water has finally reached him. So I suppose his immediate danger is done and over with, at least until we check in with him next. Moving on though, the next character we get to check in with is actually Orochi as we go to the treasure repository and we see that some vibration of some sort has wriggled loose the sea prism nail. and he is now free to transform as he sees fit. And he does make a threat towards Hiyori, but we don't get to see him enact that threat. We just see her looking shocked, and then we go right back to Momonosuke, who's being called out by Luffy. And it is at this point that we are treated to this amazing panel right here, where Luffy has a giant fist descending from the clouds, where he's claiming that he's about to end it all or defeat Kaido, and that Momonosuke needs to prep himself to move Onigashima out of the way. Now, we get a couple panels here of Yamato and Momonosuke being in shock of Luffy's declaration. Then we get this larger panel of Luffy declaring to Momo that he believes in him and that he knows he can accomplish this task. And the final two panels of the chapter are dedicated to a side-by-side of Kaido and Momonosuke reacting to the situation. So that is going to do it for the recap of chapter 1047 of One Piece. Now, I tried to condense the recap portion just a little bit more than usual, so if you guys enjoy that or felt that that's a better format, let me know in the comment section down below. But moving on to the rating for this week's chapter, I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. Ultimately, it was an amazing chapter. I just feel like it could have been a bit smoother had it been longer, or if they had cut out certain parts of what we saw in this chapter. The artwork was amazing, the story was great, but I felt like it felt a bit rushed in terms of weaving the flashback in with Momonosuke's responses and his emotional range throughout this chapter. And I think we also could have done without the whole Orochi and Hiyori thing. Maybe whatever goes down in that situation, if she's going to handle him herself or be saved by someone, we could have gotten that in a chapter of its own. We didn't need that one-page teaser here breaking up the action between Luffy and Kaido, and also the apprehension of Momonosuke and Yamato. And I also kind of feel the same way about Usopp's presence in this chapter. Don't be wrong, I love Usopp. Anytime he's present, it's usually good for laughs. But when it comes to this chapter, we literally only get 2 panels of him, and it's just something that we assume is going to happen anyways, that the water that Jinbei sent crashing through Onigashima is finally reaching him, so the threat of him being burned alive is pretty much nil at this point. So unless he washes up at some place of importance, I don't really see why his presence was utterly necessary in this chapter. It only just served to take away from the 2 central topics that we had with Luffy and Kaido's fight, and Yamato and Momonosuke accomplishing the task they have before themselves. So again, for the rating, I think 8 out of 10 is fair. It was a great chapter, but not an amazing chapter. We get some fantastic artwork, absolutely the highlight of this chapter, but the story was a bit awkwardly paced for me, so I'm not going to give it anywhere near it perfect. So with the recap and rating out of the way, now we can go ahead and discuss some important points of this chapter's content. And I guess if we're keeping things in order, one of the first things that I want to talk about is Lady Hiyori. Now, we all know that she pretty much promised to Oden that she had no intention on jumping around in time from this point forward, or at least from the point of them meeting forward. And for the most part, I think all of us are on the same page that she almost certainly did die during the events of that night. But the one thing that does raise questions for me in terms of this chapter is why she didn't want to send Hiyori with her brother. Is she just going to say, my oldest kid needs to survive, forget about my daughter because she's not a dude? I don't think that's the case. I think that Hiyori might actually be a bit more intelligent and possibly even a bit more cunning, as the only reason for her not to send Hiyori forward into the future is for her to enact some kind of plan with or for Hiyori. And I know I said that during the recap I didn't see any point to Hiyori being present in this chapter, but the flashback could be leading to why she in fact was present. Maybe we'll get another flashback in the very near future of Hiyori's point of view during the night the castle burnt down, and maybe her mother instilled some kind of confidence or some kind of plan involving Orochi, or even the reappearance of her brother and the Scabbards. So I think that we have a lot more that we'll see from Lady Hiyori before all is said and done. But moving on though, the next thing I want to briefly touch on is Luffy's Devil Fruit. Obviously, I think it's pretty self-explanatory to all of us who've been reading how it actually operates, but in this chapter I liked how Kaido was able to take advantage of Luffy carelessly using his awakened Devil Fruit. He bounced himself off of the ground to avoid damage, but in doing so he actually put himself in line to be damaged by Kaido further. Now I know this is a small thing and probably just a personal preference of mine, but I do kind of think this works out because it can't just leave Luffy up to being absolutely whimsical and accidenting into success. If he's going to use his awakened Devil Fruit, he has to use a bit more precision, a bit more thought, and maybe even aim himself as he's bouncing off of things, or onto things. So that was a real quick thing to touch on, but another thing I want to talk about is the important dialogue that we got from Kaido in this chapter, and he dropped some nuggets. We learned from him, from Kaido of all people, that Roger in fact had no devil fruit, which I think most of us suspected anyway. There's a small handful of One Piece fans who assumed he had the Gomu Gomu no Mi, but in this chapter we get the quick drop that he had no devil fruit, and in fact that Haki, at least according to Kaido, is infinitely more important to conquering the world than an actual devil fruit ability. Now for me, with Roger being mentioned in the context that Kaido used devil fruit versus Haki, I think that settles the argument once and for all, at least maybe in Oda's mind, that Haki is actually more important than a devil fruit. Now there is an awful lot to unpack when it comes to that quote in particular, but I'll do that in a separate video when I compare Haki versus devil fruit, which I'm sure many people have done, but I'll try to do it in a little more of a thoughtful way. Moving on with the discussion though, the next thing I want to talk about is the Fire Festival. It seems like things are winding down. And like I said in a much earlier review, once we first saw these lanterns brought out, my assumption was that Luffy was going to be defeating Kaido as these wishes and prayers floated up around him. And he is in fact in the sky above the clouds where these lanterns are headed, and he's declaring that he'll get victory with this punch that he's got lined up over Kaido. And if he does that, that'll be a kind of symbolic way of defeating Kaido and fulfilling the wishes of the people of Wano. And this will kind of go into line with the whole freedom concept and, you know, the sun god Nika thing. So if this happens, I mean, part of me feels like it isn't going to be paced out that way, that it couldn't possibly end this quick or in this fashion. But if it did go down like that in the next chapter or two, then that would kind of be appropriate. But part of me feels like there's a lot of things that have to be resolved first before Luffy actually defeats Kaido. And if it doesn't go down like that, then it might just be that Oda is changing up the way he does things. And if that is the case, then I'm all for it. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is the whole Hiyori situation. And I know I already touched on this a little bit earlier in the video, but I do think and hope that she is the one who is going to officially cut down Orochi. If there's a small chance that her mother had Hiyori hang around specifically to keep an eye on Orochi, or specifically to try to keep him on, I guess, a less murderous rampage, then I could definitely see her taking her revenge out on him by the end of this arc. But ultimately, the way she appears in this chapter, it seems like she is helpless. So Oda could turn that on its head and have her, you know, lop off Orochi's head, and the next time we go back to the treasure repository, or it's possible that someone might break in there and save the day. And I hope that's not the case, that, you know, Hiyori has to be the damsel in distress. But I'm just gonna say that if Orochi is going to die in this arc, that she should absolutely be the one to hand him that death. Alright fam, so that is going to do it for my review for chapter 1047 of One Piece. It was an amazing chapter. If I missed anything, or if you guys have anything you want to talk about in regards to this chapter, leave it in the comment section down below. I'm always listening and always willing to talk One Piece. Also, if you guys enjoyed this video and want to see more content like this, go ahead, like, share, and subscribe. It would be doing me a solid. Thank you guys very much for making it all the way through the video. I'll see you guys very soon with another One Piece vid. Thank you again. I'll see you in the next one.